So, as a reminder, in Lin Xiu's presentation, so I also introduced the study, a case study, in Africa, in Ethiopia. And this project funded by UNEP, UNEP, and NSFC. Here, so it's just 10 minutes, so I can give a brief introduction only. Well, first, yeah. So why? And this study is East Africa and is suitable or has some useful to West Africa. And yes, so let's have a overlook on the map of West Africa and East Africa and West Africa. So it also located in the dryland and dryland ecosystem too. So there has a similar condition and also, of course, similar emergency problems, water and land use and others. So, and it also suitable for the method to study. So for the local and large scale and the national scale, so I hope to introduce here and benefits to some idea on the study in Africa, in Senegal. So this is the gap study in all over the world. So well, when you compare the result in China and in Africa, you can find, anyway, in China, the gap between the higher crop yield and the current result is very high. And if the 10%, so it's a little potential. However, if it's a red or deep, deep red, and it's a huge potential. So we can find not only East Africa and also West Africa. So we can find, yes, there's a huge potential. Well, this also, we want to introduce a method or the others in Africa. So maybe I also can answer a little why we carry out the study in Africa, not only China. Yeah, so the problem in China has been, all has been studied? No, not yet. So yes, we hope use the method, the successful method in China, and maybe our technology or knowledge also can contribute to Africa, not only Western and also East. So yes, so it's also, we started in Africa. Well, on the Ethiopia is the second largest population in Africa, and also very quick developing rate and GDP. So, however, it's also the most populated landlocked country in the world. Yeah, of course, the agriculture contributes is most, and not only the labor, and also the GDP. So, agriculture is very, very important in this country. Well, however, it's a little different from Senegal. So this is a climate classification. So you can find it's about 9 classification, 9 types. However, well, if you see the map in Senegal, it's about 3, so it's simple. So I think if we have a better result in Ethiopia, I believe, so it also can be have some practice in Senegal. So, and the land use also is very hard to understand because the land type and the topography. In Senegal and also, when I arrived in Senegal, and the lowest place, the elevation is 1,100 meters, while however the top is more higher than 3,000 meters. So it's very high, and also the wheat also planted in the areas higher than 3,000 meters in elevation. So on the current advance. So however, when I arrived first time in Africa, so to Rwanda, it's hard for me to understand, well, the climate change impact. So because, you know, the temperature is from 20 to 30 Celsius degree only, so the change is stable. However, based on the long-term data, you can find the rainfall amount declines sharply, and however, the rainy day decrease also sharply. What's the mean? So, and the other character is the variation increase, so you can find. So before 1980s is stable. However, after that, the change is huge. What's the mean? The means is the heavy rain. So the rainfall is declined. However, the heavy rain can be found. In Ethiopia, we can find the flood is very serious, and even the stone with a diameter about 2 meters, and from the mountain areas to the lower ridge. So currently, especially the raining day, and maybe every year only less than 7 days. However, the flood is very serious. So it's most important climate change. And not only the general date, also the spatial distribution. Yeah, at the spatial scale is also distribution is very large. So this distribution will bring the huge disturb. Compare the agricultural development between China and Ethiopia. You can find, well, in China, in general, it's stable. However, in Ethiopia, you can find that the change is very large. Not only but we can find the same is the population increase. However, now in China, it's become stable and stable. However, in Ethiopia, the population is increased 4 to 5 times than 30 years ago. Well, here is some study result on the agriculture and the distribution. We used the remote sensing method to understand the agroecosystem distribution in 2015. So you can find, and the distribution is very limited, and many areas is distributed by the sand and the dry land. Okay, and on the outlook, so here and as the introduction by Professor Bourdieu and Lin Xiao. So we have a CERN, and we have 18 stations in agricultural ecosystem. So in all of these ecosystems, not only the northwestern and also the southwestern, so we can find the types is very plentiful. Not only the desert and lowland and multi-highlands and highlands and extreme highlands also covered. So, and after the long-term development of agriculture, so the technology system has become plentiful. So we also hope the technology or knowledge from the CERN we can share to Africa. And the second, so we hope based on the results from Ethiopia and the study in Ethiopia, also we hope to start the study in Senegal, and we can hope to contribute a line from west to east. We also have some study in Rwanda, so we also hope can find some dryland ecosystem, especially the dryland agro-ecosystem, and we hope to construct the knowledge and technology suitable for the dryland ecosystem. So if you want to do, let's join us. Thank you.
I'm going to share with you some research that we've been doing in Zimbabwe, focusing mostly on some adaptation strategies that have been tried out, particularly by a local non-governmental organization called Community Technology Development Trust. And this non-governmental organization is basically looking at developing technologies mostly for smallholder farmers. And the idea is I'm going to go through the presentation, give you a small introduction. I'll then give you some climate context and trends of the study areas that we have concentrated on. I will then look at some of the perceptions of the farmers on climate change versus the findings that we have actually found from data. And then I'm going to concentrate on some of the possible coping strategies that have been tried out. And I'll end up with a discussion of some of the challenges and future perspectives of these strategies. So I think we all have heard about the problems in Africa, and these mostly relate to the fact that we are one of the most vulnerable regions in the world to climate change, and this is caused by three main factors. First, it is the widespread poverty in most of our countries, and then, of course, as a result of that poverty, limited coping capacity, and also limited adaptive capacity. And, of course, most of our African smallholder farmers are also over-dependent on rainfall-based agriculture, and as a result, they are at the mercy of climate. So in Zimbabwe, these are some of the topical issues that we see and that we hear in the media every time related to climate change. And so we then thought we ought to start researching on some of these things. So we have experienced everything from drought to floods. Sometimes in the same year, we have had these same problems. So we can have droughts for 2 months in the growing period, and then maybe the next week we then get all the rainfall that we would have got in a year. And that therefore is not good for agriculture. And so this is the major problem that we had. So initially what we did was just basically to look at the climate in the country. And we basically were looking at using not only observed data, but also satellite-based data. So these pictures here are actually showing us the mean temperatures over the country from 1951 to 2012. And what we find then also are that the temperature trends are also showing basically here an increase in temperature of about 0.2, 0.3 degrees per decade. The rainfall also shows that most of the country receives less than 1,000 millimeters, and this comes in 3 months or 4 months in a year, which again is not very good for productive agriculture. And also the trends in the country have also been projecting and also indicating a negative trend, which means we have been having a decrease in the amount of rainfall that we have received in the country. We also tried to go forward into the future, and so we looked at 2 periods, the mid-century, the 2050s period, and we looked at 2 scenarios. One is basically the worst case scenario, which is the business as usual scenario, and the other one is the best case scenario, which means if we are able to reverse the greenhouse gas emissions, what would happen. And what we actually see is that in both pictures in the 2050s, we still get an increase in temperature, though in the best case scenario, the temperature increase goes down to about 2 degrees. And in terms of the later part of the 21st century, that is from the 2080s, we see that the country would be more or less divided into 2. The west part would receive temperatures of up to 5 to 6 degrees, and the eastern part of the country would be around 4 degrees Celsius. And under the best case scenario, the whole country would be almost uniform at about 2 or 3 degrees Celsius. And so basically what we are seeing is that in the country, if we are able to practice agriculture that at least reverses the greenhouse emissions, we will at least be able to reduce some of the projected climate change indicators. In terms of rainfall, the picture is also not very encouraging. We see that for the worst case scenario in the 2050s, we again are going to get below normal rainfall across most of the country. And in the best case scenario, at least the reduction will be there, but at least it will be a bit lower. And in the worst case scenario, we actually see further reductions in the rainfall. And so based on this, we then started conducting research, and we then teamed up with some local governmental organizations to try and do this. And so in this particular paper, I'm going to discuss some of the strategies that have been employed by CTDT, which is a local NGO, and we are going to showcase some of the most successful case studies, and we'll also highlight some of the challenges and then look at the way forward. So CTDT, we developed a 4-tier approach, which means first of all we needed to assess the climate risk, and so that we can look at coming up with the entry point. And so the first part really is an assessment of the climate risk and vulnerability. And then we also tried to introduce strategies that involve the local indigenous knowledge system. So we also had to try and understand the local strategies in responding to climate change risks. And then we identified the adaptation strategies with the farmers, and then we then tried to implement some of these strategies and then evaluated. And we were basically following the climate change mainstreaming framework of Lee Baird. So we did the research in 8 districts of the country, and you will find, according to the agroecology of the country, that these are mostly in the areas that are climate, or that are most vulnerable in terms of climate. So the country is divided into 5 agroecological regions, Region 1 being the best and Region 5 being the worst. So you can see most of the project areas are in the either Region 5 or Region 4 of the country. The exception is this district, which is Goromonzi, which was in Region 2, and we're just trying to use it as a control. And so the first thing that we did was to do a survey. And so we had farmers' responses to a semi-structured questionnaire, and we also had focus group discussions to follow up on some of the issues that came out of the questionnaire. But in most cases, we're trying to look at the current cropping methods as well as the diversity, and also their perceptions, and also then in the end to try and come up with the strategies together with the farmers. So we basically talked to about close to 3,000 farmers in the 8 district areas. We tried to divide this into 2. So we had one process during the rainy season, and then the other process just after the rainy season. So we're trying to look at how farmers basically look at the 2 periods. One, which is the November period, is mostly characterized by food shortages, and then the June period is just after the harvest. So it's mostly characterized by adequate food. And so we found that most of the farmers basically agree that there are changes in the climate, and because of this, we then did the analysis, and we found that the analysis also agreed with the perceptions. So we found basically increases in temperature in all the districts, and we found some decreases in temperature in some of the districts, though some did not have significant rainfall change, but the variability was what we found to be of interest. So the adaptation strategies that we then came up with, we had first community-based biodiversity management, which meant looking at diversifying and managing the biodiversity in the areas. And we also tried to empower the farmers, and one of that process included coming up with a farmer seeds cooperative, which we then called Champion Seeds. So they are now producing their own seed and selling amongst themselves. Then we also upscaled some of the experiences through the farmer fields concept, and we established about 300 farmer field schools in the area. And we also came up with a number of field guides that we use for their day-to-day operations. And then lastly, we also tried to come up with new innovations, and one of them was a mobile app, which is called Digital Diversity Wheel, which they basically use to try and identify varieties which work from other areas that they can then share amongst themselves. And so the app is supposed to work to try and make sure that they can choose these varieties across the districts. So in terms of the challenges, we find that one of the major issues is that the adaptation planning in most of the country is not in sync, particularly with sustainable development planning, and therefore we need more policy advocacy so that we can get the right policies. And then the second one, obviously, is that the heavy dependence on rain-fed agriculture require us to use technologies that at least are climate smart. So we are basically looking at science, technology, innovation, and capacity building, and also the use of new innovations, particularly using remote sensing to try and upscale some of these technologies. And this is basically where the partnership with China actually comes in handy. And we actually want to extend some of these projects across the country and maybe even across the Southern African region. Thank you very much.
Bonjour, je vous remercie pour votre Attention, je vais donc vous présenter une communication qui porte sur les vulnérabilités sociales et politiques au cœur des activités d'élevage dans les zones arides, précisément au niveau du Sénégal et du Mali. Alors, ces recherches ont pour cadre trois programmes internationaux de recherche. Le premier, c'est le programme AMA, analyse multidisciplinaire sur la mousson africaine. Le second, c'est le programme ECLIS sur la vulnérabilité, adaptabilité des activités d'élevage au Sahel. Et enfin, le troisième, c'est celui sur les céréales en Afrique de l'Ouest. Alors, comment se présente la problématique de la vulnérabilité des activités d'élevage au Sahel? On le sait, la variabilité climatique au Sahel est une donnée structurelle des économies sahéliennes, mais ce qui apparaît comme étant véritablement un enjeu majeur pour les activités comme celle d'élevage, c'est l'accentuation de cette variabilité climatique à partir des années 70. Accentuation de la vulnérabilité, de la variabilité qui donc agit à la fois sur les écosystèmes, mais également sur les moyens d'existence des populations. À la base, nous avions pour projet de travailler sur la vision des populations locales, donc de leurs difficultés, mais également la manière dont ils géraient justement les risques liés au stress hydrique. Nous nous intéressions également aux représentations que ces populations elles-mêmes se faisaient de ce qu'on appelle généralement la crise de l'eau dans un contexte de variabilité climatique. Alors, en termes d'approche pour définir la vulnérabilité sociale, puisque je suis sociologue de formation, trois façons de définir cette vulnérabilité sociale, en partant d'abord de l'exposition au risque qui est source de danger, mais également en identifiant les moyens disponibles et ceux justement et les enjeux et ceux qui sont mobilisables, pardon, pour aider les communautés à se remettre de certaines situations insatisfaisantes. En troisième lieu, nous nous intéressions également aux règles effectives qui régissent donc les activités au niveau des configurations locales sur lesquelles nous travaillons. Alors, les résultats, comment les communautés locales du Sahel, précisément du Sénégal et du Mali, pensent leur vulnérabilité, l'eau apparaît comme étant la principale contrainte, donc ce que nous avons appelé un facteur générique de risque, donc qui est source de vulnérabilité dans la mesure où le stress hydrique agit non seulement sur les écosystèmes, sur l'agriculture, mais également sur les populations elles-mêmes. Ce qui est également apparu comme étant extrêmement important à nos yeux, c'est que l'avènement d'événements extrêmes apparaissent aussi comme étant des sources de vulnérabilité. Et par rapport justement à ce résultat de recherche, il apparaît que le manque de préparation des populations par rapport à certains événements peut être lourd de conséquences. Nous avons identifié principalement des vulnérabilités au niveau de 3 échelles. La première, c'est l'échelle dite nationale. Et en partant donc de cette échelle-là, l'étude des politiques publiques et plus précisément de l'action publique laisse apparaître que les politiques publiques sont aussi porteuses de vulnérabilités qui leur sont intrinsèques. Cette vulnérabilité, elle se manifeste en termes de fragilité, par exemple, des politiques relatives au financement, la mise en application, l'implémentation souvent assez tardive des projets et programmes, mais également les problèmes liés à la territorialisation de certaines politiques publiques comme celle d'hydraulique pastorale, mais également la politique publique de décentralisation. Évidemment, ces vulnérabilités génériques génèrent d'autres vulnérabilités que nous avons appelées des vulnérabilités dérivées, comme par exemple l'incapacité de certains éleveurs à accéder à certaines ressources du fait justement de la mise en œuvre de certains projets. Et je crois que le collègue Omar Sy a parlé ce matin des restrictions liées, par exemple, à l'accès aux ressources du fait de la mise en œuvre du projet d'autopromotion pastorale au niveau de la communauté rurale de Tessékré. Nous avons aussi identifié un certain nombre de blocages, ce que nous avons appelé la gouvernance bloquée, relativement à la mise en œuvre effective de la gestion des ressources naturelles dans un pays comme le Mali. Par exemple, nous avons montré que après la mise en agenda politique de l'environnement et plus particulièrement de la gestion des ressources naturelles dans un pays comme le Mali, la politique publique de décentralisation est bloquée du fait que la commission interministérielle chargée justement de faire le travail nécessaire dans ce sens ne fonctionnait pas, en plus des difficultés que certains services techniques avaient également à évaluer les ressources nécessaires au transfert des compétences, sans compter également la capacité d'influence limitée de certaines institutions comme le Haut Conseil des collectivités territoriales du Mali, mais également l'Association des municipalités du Mali. Il en est de même d'ailleurs pour les organisations faîtières. Pour ce qui concerne le niveau intermédiaire, alors les enjeux vulnérables sont, par exemple, c'est surtout l'élevage pastoral, puisque nous avons travaillé auprès de communautés d'agro-pasteurs. Le cheptel est vulnérable en termes de perte d'embonpoint, mais également en termes de faible production de lait, mais aussi en termes de faible reproduction. Donc des taux de mise bas qui sont très, très faibles. Des vulnérabilités aussi ont été identifiées par rapport à ce qu'on appelle globalement l'action collective. Par exemple, les difficultés auxquelles les comités de gestion des forages sont confrontés, en plus justement du caractère pluraliste et fragmenté des organisations d'éleveurs. Les configurations sociopolitiques locales aussi sont porteuses d'un certain nombre de vulnérabilités. Il en est par exemple de la gouvernance locale, qui souvent est assez problématique du fait de la politisation très forte, surtout au Sénégal, de la marginalité justement des communautés d'éleveurs, comme nous l'avons pu le constater au Mali et au Bénin, mais aussi de la compétition souvent très rude entre les factions on va dire, entre les lignages dominants. C'est le cas, par exemple, à Huidu Chingoli, entre les Bisnabe et les Pambinabe. Voilà. D'autres vulnérabilités aussi liées à la faible, on va dire, action communale, hein, du fait du manque de préparation des élus à leurs fonctions, mais aussi des problèmes liés à la lourdeur des procédures et au fait que les municipalités apparaissent plus comme étant un pouvoir de ponction que comme un pouvoir d'action. Alors, je vais faire vite. Tout ça, justement, aboutit aussi à des situations assez paradoxales. Par exemple, ici, nous avons l'exemple de la commune de Ombori, hein, un conseil municipal composé de 17 membres, mais approprié par le chef-lieu de commune où presque la majorité des membres du conseil municipal sont issus. À côté de cela, en plus de cela, les luttes entre les lignages dominants empêchent également la prise en charge des problèmes des éleveurs. Et au niveau des éleveurs proprement dit, on ne le dira jamais assez, en dehors des contraintes qui sont liées justement au stress hydrique, aux pauses pluviométriques qui peuvent être parfois assez longues, comme c'est le cas par exemple cette année au Sénégal au niveau de certaines régions, l'accès à certaines ressources, dont notamment les ressources pastorales, est payant au niveau de certaines zones, surtout en saison sèche, ce qui accentue des mobilités plus orientées vers le sud et qui parfois même vont jusqu'au Mali. Thank you for your attention.